The old maps lie. For centuries, school children have memorized the names etched into history books: Columbus, Magellan, Vasco da Gama. These men, celebrated as brave pioneers who ventured into unknown waters and discovered new worlds. But history has a way of forgetting. It buries inconvenient truths beneath layers of convenient fiction. What if the greatest explorers weren't the ones in your textbooks? What if the first men to chart unknown seas, to cross impossible oceans, to map uncharted territories, had their names deliberately erased from the pages of time? Today, that silence breaks. Before we journey into these forgotten stories, a simple request. If you believe these names deserve to be heard, hit that like button. Right now, subscribe and turn on notifications, because what you're about to discover changes everything you thought you knew about exploration. Share this with someone who needs to know the real history. Now, let's begin. The year is 1492. 3 ships cut through the Atlantic swells: the Niña, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. On the deck of the Santa Maria stands a man whose name history would try to forget. His name is Pedro Alonso Niño, a black Spanish navigator whose skill with celestial instruments kept those ships from vanishing into the endless blue, while Christopher Columbus receives credit for discovering the New World. It was Pedro who calculated their position by the stars, who read the currents and winds, who understood the mathematics of navigation that Columbus himself struggled to comprehend. Pedro wasn't just crew. He was a master pilot, trained in the sophisticated navigation techniques that separated successful voyages from disasters. When Columbus felt lost in those vast waters, it was Pedro's expertise that guided them forward. When doubt crept into the hearts of the sailors, threatening mutiny, it was Pedro's confident calculations that kept them sailing west. The irony cuts deep. The man credited with discovery couldn't have found his way without the black navigator whose contributions were systematically minimized in every history book that followed. But Pedro's story doesn't end with Columbus's voyage. In 1499, 7 years after that first journey, Pedro Alonso Niño commanded his own expedition. He sailed along the coast of South America, mapping territories, discovering pearl-rich waters near Venezuela, and returning to Spain with wealth that proved his capabilities as both navigator and explorer. He made his own discoveries, claimed his own territories, yet his name appears in footnotes while Columbus owns entire chapters. The Spanish archives hold the proof: official documents detailing Pedro's voyages, his skills, his contributions. They were there all along, gathering dust while a different narrative dominated the world's imagination. The erasure wasn't accidental. It was systematic, deliberate, a pattern that would repeat itself across centuries and continents. Pedro Alonso Niño represents the first thread in a tapestry of forgotten explorers, black men whose achievements were buried beneath the weight of a history written by those who refused to acknowledge their genius. Now, the journey takes us backward in time, nearly 200 years before Columbus ever set sail. The year is 1311. In West Africa, the Mali Empire stands as one of the wealthiest and most sophisticated civilizations on Earth. Its emperor, Abubakari II, sits upon a throne of gold in a kingdom that stretches across territory larger than Western Europe. Mali's scholars study astronomy and mathematics in the great University of Timbuktu. Its trade networks extend across the Sahara. Its wealth is legendary, its culture refined. Yet Emperor Abubakari II finds himself consumed by a question that will not release him. What lies beyond the Western Ocean? The Atlantic stretches endless and mysterious beyond Mali's western borders. Abubakari watches the sun set over those waters night after night, wondering what lands might exist on the other side. He is not content with wealth and power. He craves knowledge, discovery, the answers to questions that keep him awake long after his court has retired. So he makes a decision that shocks his advisors and threatens the stability of his empire. He will send an expedition into the Atlantic to discover what lies beyond 200 ships are prepared. The best vessels Mali can construct, loaded with provisions, crewed by experienced sailors who understand the coastal waters but have never ventured into the deep ocean. They sail west, disappearing beyond the horizon, carrying with them the emperor's dreams of discovery. Months pass. The empire waits. Then a miracle. One ship returns, but the captain's report is devastating. They encountered a powerful current in the ocean, something like a river within the sea. It pulled ships into its grasp and would not release them. Only his vessel escaped. The rest were swallowed by the Atlantic. Most rulers would accept defeat. Most would count their losses and forget the dream. But Abubakari II is not most rulers. The captain's report doesn't discourage him. It fascinates him. There is a current, a river in the ocean. This is knowledge. This is something to understand and overcome. He begins planning a second expedition, but this one will be different. This one will be larger, better prepared, and this time, the emperor himself will sail. The decision stuns his kingdom. An emperor does not abandon his throne. An emperor does not risk himself in uncertain ventures. But Abubakari II has already made his choice. He abdicates, placing his brother Mansa Musa on the throne. The same Mansa Musa who would later become famous as the richest man in history. In 1311, Abubakari II assembles 2,000 ships, 2,000 vessels loaded with provisions, livestock, supplies for establishing colonies in whatever lands they might discover. On a morning that would be forgotten by history, Emperor Abubakari II sails west into the Atlantic and vanishes from the written record. He never returned to Africa. For centuries, historians dismissed the story as myth, as the exaggerated tales of oral tradition. But oral histories preserved by Mali's griots, the traditional storytellers and historians, have proven remarkably accurate about other historical events when later verified by archaeology and written records. And there is more. Christopher Columbus himself, in his journals, mentions encountering black traders already present in the Caribbean. He notes their sophisticated boats, their trade goods. Pre-Columbian archaeological sites in South America have yielded artifacts of African origin, plants that shouldn't exist there, tools of African design, even DNA evidence suggesting contact between Africa and the Americas before European arrival. The evidence doesn't prove beyond doubt that Abubakari II reached the Americas, but it strongly suggests that someone from Africa did, and the timeline matches perfectly with Mali's emperor and his 2,000 ships. Imagine the magnitude of that achievement. An emperor who surrendered absolute power and unimaginable wealth for the possibility of discovery. A man who sailed into legend, who may have been the first to truly cross the Atlantic, from the old world to the new, nearly 200 years before Columbus. Yet his name appears in no textbook, no monument, no celebration of exploration. The pattern continues. The erasure deepens. Now the story shifts to a different kind of explorer, a man who began his journey not as a king or skilled navigator, but as property. His name was Estevanico, though he was also called Stephen the Moor, Esteban, and several other variations depending on who told his story. He was Moroccan from the North African coast, and in 1527 he found himself enslaved and part of a Spanish expedition to Florida. The expedition was doomed from the start. 600 men set out to conquer and colonize Florida. Within months, disease, hostile encounters, hurricanes, and starvation reduced that number to a handful of desperate survivors. Estevanico became one of only 4 men to survive the disaster. For 8 years, these 4 survivors wandered through what is now Texas and northern Mexico. 8 years of surviving in hostile territory, with no supplies, no support, no hope of rescue. They were captured by various native tribes, enslaved, escaped, captured again. The journey should have killed them dozens of times over, but Estevanico possessed something that kept them alive: an extraordinary gift for languages, and an ability to communicate across cultures. He learned the languages of the tribes they encountered. He became a translator, a mediator, a bridge between worlds. The survivors developed reputations as healers, and Estevanico, despite his status as an enslaved man in Spanish society, became the leader of their small group when dealing with native peoples. The irony was not lost on him. Enslaved by Europeans, yet among Native Americans, he was the one with power, with respect, with agency. When the four survivors finally reached Spanish settlements in Mexico in 1536, their tales of survival captivated the colonial authorities. But more than survival stories, they brought rumors of wealthy cities to the north, tales told by the tribes they'd encountered. The Spanish called these mythical places the Seven Cities of Gold. The Viceroy of New Spain decided to send an expedition to find them, and the choice of who would lead the advance party was obvious. Estevanico, the man who could speak the languages, who understood the peoples and the territories, who had already survived 8 years in that harsh landscape. In 1539, Estevanico set out as the guide for a major Spanish expedition. He traveled ahead of the main party, blazing trails through what is now Arizona and New Mexico. He was the first non-native person to explore the American Southwest, opening routes that Spanish conquistadors would follow for centuries. His knowledge made the colonization of that entire region possible. He sent back reports, maps, information about the peoples and resources. He was, in every meaningful sense, the true explorer of that expedition. But Estevanico was still enslaved. Despite his invaluable contributions, despite his leadership and expertise, he remained property in the eyes of Spanish law. He led the expedition through territory that would later become multiple American states, yet he did so in chains, metaphorical if not always physical. His journey ended tragically in 1539 when he was killed by Zuni people in what is now New Mexico. The reasons for his death remain debated. Perhaps a misunderstanding, perhaps the Zuni recognized him as an advanced scout for Spanish invaders who would bring destruction to their people. Estevanico died serving masters who never freed him. And history gave his discoveries to the Spanish explorers who followed in his footsteps. For centuries, his contributions were minimized or attributed to others. Only recently have historians begun to properly recognize him as the first African explorer of the American Southwest, a man whose maps and knowledge shaped the destiny of an entire region, yet whose name barely appears in the stories of American exploration. 3 men, 3 centuries, 3 continents. Pedro Alonso Niño, navigating Columbus across an unknown ocean. Abubakari II, leading 2,000 ships into legend. Estevanico, mapping the American Southwest while still enslaved. Each of them first, each of them forgotten. Each of them systematically erased from a historical narrative that couldn't accommodate their achievements without challenging comfortable myths about who discovers, who explores, who makes history. The pattern of erasure wasn't accidental. It was constructed deliberately over centuries, built by those who wrote the histories and controlled which stories survived. These 3 men represent countless others, explorers, navigators, guides whose names vanished into footnotes or disappeared entirely. How many more stories remain buried in archives, dismissed in oral traditions, waiting for someone to resurrect them from historical oblivion? But truth has a persistent quality. It resurfaces. Modern historians, archaeologists, and researchers are excavating these forgotten narratives, finding the documentation, validating the oral histories, proving that the world was explored by far more diverse peoples than old textbooks acknowledged. Pedro's documents are being studied. Abubakari's story is being researched. Estevanico's name now appears on monuments and highways in the southwest. The truth is emerging, slowly but inevitably. These men were first. The evidence is clear. Their courage matched any celebrated explorer. Their skills were exceptional. Their contributions were fundamental to the age of exploration. They opened oceans, crossed continents, mapped unknown territories. They deserve to stand beside, or ahead of, every name celebrated in history books. Now you know what they didn't teach you in school. But knowledge means nothing if it stays silent, if it dies in the moment of learning, and spreads no further. Smash that like button to push this story to more people who need to hear it. Subscribe because we're uncovering more hidden history every week. Stories that challenge everything you thought you knew. Share this video. Tag a teacher, a student, a friend, anyone who needs to know that history is larger and more complex than we were told. Comment below and tell us which explorer surprised you most. Which story you want to hear more about. History isn't just what happened. It's what we choose to remember, what we choose to tell, what we refuse to let be forgotten. For too long, the choice was made for us by those who controlled the narrative. Now, the choice is ours. Let's choose to remember them all. Let's choose to tell the complete story. Let's choose to ensure that no explorer, no matter their skin color, vanishes from the history they helped create. The old maps lied. It's time we redrew them with the truth.